everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. This is our third week talking about reigniting the holidays.
Yeah.
And we've gotten some really good perspectives. And today, we're going to get the perspective of Gabriel Huft. Really excited to have you on again, Gabriel. It's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. It's a unique thing when we're talking about reigniting the holidays because I think most of us have similar experiences, but every one of us has a unique experience.
Yeah.
Kind of double negatives there, but
we're all similar. We're all special little snowflakes.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. We all look like snowflakes, but we're different on the inside. Maybe
all
not
right,
that, but it's Christmas and it's the holiday season, so I'm going with that. Gabe, why don't you tell us a little bit about why we're having this sit down with you in particular?
Well, in particular, I think I was asking Travis because I get an opportunity to talk to him a little bit more than the average person, and I was like, "Hey, what's this month's podcast about?" And he was like, "Well, it's about reigniting." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's just the banner.
Yeah.
What exactly?
That's just the graphic.
Yeah, that's like your top." Your catch banner is like reigniting. I was like, what does that mean? And he's like, well, it's kind of like people going through the same things, and it kind of like dwindles over time. And I'm just kind of like nodding. And I'm like, all right, well, I know exactly what you're talking about because I kind of experienced that. Because I got saved like 4 years ago,
right?
And my very first Christmas, I went from like kind of like a secular worldview of Christmas, to like the moment that God decided to step into time and put himself into a human body and try to redeem all of humanity. And for me, that very first Christmas, it was just like a huge wave of just thankfulness and emotions and just everything. I was just like, wow, oh my goodness. Like, because like the reality of what Jesus did when he came here was just so inspiring. And it was like, oh wow, like individually and collectively for every person he did that. So for me, it was kind of like this
overwhelming experience.
Just emotional from every aspect. I mean, I would take, like everybody like has like their holiday traditions of like, so when I was a kid, my mom used to watch like It's a Wonderful Life. Like, and back then it was like on repeat on almost every major cable institution. So it was like, and I was completely sick of it. And then like 4 years ago, I was like, all right. And then like, look at It's a Wonderful Life. I looked at it with a new set of eyes. Because of what Jesus had done. It was like, okay, well, this is more, it was more invigorating. It was more, it brought a whole new life to everything about the whole world. It was amazing. So, and then Travis is like, "Hey, you want to be on the podcast?" So I was like, "Sure, I'll do it."
That's how you get on the podcast. You ask me questions and then share your story. And if it fits really well, it's just like, "Hey, guess what? You just signed up for."
Yeah. So that I love that because it's so it's recent, right?
Right.
And it's also like you're now experiencing this kind of dwindling effect.
Yeah. So like I've noticed like the last couple years, it's like the awe-inspiring, the wave of emotions, the just the majestic of God coming down. It's like, okay, well, it's like it's just like anything else. It's like you can't keep on doing the exact same thing and expect like same results. So and I was just I thought it was very interesting because for me, I don't know.
Well, how does it? I'm just curious. Like, you're kind of in the midst of like navigating, this feeling. Like, how are you feeling? I guess about this. Tad is gonna hate me for asking you that, but
you said feeling like 4 times in one sentence.
I know, but how is it affecting you? I guess.
So I'm still trying to navigate it because. The feelings are one part of it, but it's more so it's like how do I change my perspective on it, because it's like and I've been taking my secular experience, so my military service. Every time you go overseas, it was like you can get kind of complacent and so on and so forth. So I'm taking the stuff that I have done in the past how did I get over the repetitiveness, the making it so it's just ho-hum business as usual.
Yeah.
And I'm still evaluating it. Honestly, I haven't really come to a conclusive fix.
And that really is why we're talking about this month, is that, I have a friend who is part of, many friends who are part of the State Patrol, but one who recently started working for the governor directly, kind of like his personal people.
Interesting.
And I guess they rotate out every couple of years and get new people because of the nature of just humanity, that we do become naturally complacent, not out of a desire to, not just because things become normal and become routine, and it's really easy to let our guard down essentially when things become routine. And so in society all over, we safeguard against that in so many ways. And so how are we safeguarding against it in this context? Just kind of two things, curious about your experience, Gabriel. When did you first notice that your appreciation was dwindling about these holidays, and when did it start bothering you? Because those are two totally different things. Because you might notice it and just be like, well, that's natural and that's normal. And then at
this
some
is
point,
there's years that go in between.
Totally.
This.
But at some point it becomes this is normal, but is it good? This is natural, but is it right?
Right. So last Christmas, I think, was the first time it actually started to bother me. I can't, I say that I just generally noticed it beforehand. I don't know exactly if it was Christmas before that but last year was the first, because as you approach the season, you start to get
all the things.
Yeah. You have your decorating times.
You have all your list of things to do, people buy presents for, and responsibilities to handle. Yeah.
So this last year's the first year I started noticing it, and I was just kind of well, I guess it's just part of the experience now. It's it's just going to be not as sharp, because it's not new, but there's also something that there's aspects I think that we need to grab a hold of, which are going to be important to reignite it. And for me, I think it's more of an apologetic type of look at it, because I look at J. Warner Wallace's his book Person of Interest, and it's just kind of
okay, now you got to describe, because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, so J. Warner Wallace, he was a detective. Do you know who he is? No. So
you thought he did from his last statement?
I did. So J. Warner Wallace,
he was Jesus. He's a person of interest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Jesus.
Same page.
So he was a detective. He kind of was an atheist. Long story short, came to Christ through the Stand to Reason's ministry, and he kind of looks at it from a detective worldview of cause and effects. Anyway, so he goes through the whole birth of Christ and what has happened in society.
What's happened in the last 2,000 years.
Investigative kind of role.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So his book, Person of Interest, really kind of has ignited the importance of Christ and his dwelling on the earth, because it really has changed society in the way that...
Yeah, the direction of humanity.
Yes.
Not just in eternity, but even how we've developed around certain arts and music and everything just around Christ, and how that pushed forward a lot of culture.
Right.
Wow. So
how does that help?
How does that help you?
Yeah. How is that changing your Christmas experience, and how are you going to continue allowing whether that or other things to continue changing your Christmas experiences?
So
you have many more Christmases to live, Gabriel.
Yeah, hopefully, God willing, right? So for me, it was it's a way to get my heart, because everything about the gospel is about heart work. So it's not... It's when Jesus said, what comes out of your mouth is what actually comes out of your heart.
Yeah.
It's because that's the position that you're holding.
Yeah.
And for me, that's kind of reigniting the importance of Christ walking on earth. We know he's going to come back someday, but for right now, it's holding on to what the implications of what he has done and how it has positively affected.
Yeah.
Because I think it's kind of important to just that workings of the heart and through prayer, and just kind of like dwelling on those sort of things.
It kind of reminds me. I don't think we've talked about this yet this month, but in a similar way, when we had our month talking about studying the Bible,
mm-hmm.
I think that there's a similar thing that happens, like and there's an answer to it. So I'll just kind of explain, we're reading the Bible.
Ask the question that you're going to answer to.
Yeah.
Set yourself up.
As we're reading the Bible, right, we're reading through these books, and over a period of time, you end up rereading. That's just the nature of.
Hopefully,
the Bible is
many
only
times.
X amount of pages here, and
it's a finite amount of reading to do.
Exactly, and the hope as a Christian is that you're going to go over this many, many times.
Yeah.
And I think there's this tendency to be like, well, I've already read through, the Gospels. I've already read, Genesis. I already read all these things. Like, what else could I get from this? And you you're not as excited necessarily like the first time or the first couple times you read a book. Like I take, for me, recently it was, reading through the apostles, with Paul and Peter and John, all those things. And I'm reading through them, and I've read through them so many different times before. I think they're the easiest to read, so I've done
so
them.
I keep doing it
many times. And I thought to myself, it's like I'm kind of at this point now where I'm gonna go through these again, and I'm not looking forward to it. And like genuinely, this is just my
honesty,
inside
yeah.
And but then it's like I know, because I look back, what we've talked about and the truths that the Lord reveals new things to you every time. Like all you have to do is focus on the Lord. Don't just do it to check things off. Don't just do it because it's on your list. But you can redo this or reread this, and if you're focusing on the Lord, He's going to reveal new things to you. And so it's like that kind of hypes me back up. Like, okay, what do you have? And sure enough, I'm reading through, and it's like I didn't even get this before, and I had to check if I was totally out of the realm. And it's like, wow, that's
I not
actually
get this because no one's ever gotten this because it's wrong.
Yeah. So,
My
but
heritage.
It
but
turns
I found
out
someone on Reddit who agreed with me, therefore I'm fine.
Exactly. So
Don't do that, please.
I think, and this is where I'm bringing it full circle here. I think holidays. I don't know why we haven't talked about this yet, but I think we can do that same thing with holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And it really revolves around intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
It really revolves around being intentional. Like, am I just going through the holiday now to check stuff off the list,
mm-hmm.
or am I going to enter into this holiday, no matter how busy or crazy, whatever's happening, am I going to just completely check into this thing and seek Christ in it? Because He's going to reveal something new.
Yeah.
He can reignite kind of new parts of our heart, I guess, in that way. So it'll never be like the first time.
No.
It'll never be like the first time. But it could be better the 50th time. Who knows?
Well, and there's a certain amount of so twofold. One, that's why when I talked at the beginning of the month how I mentioned things you could add, ways you could study differently or just like that, but also ways you can subtract, because sometimes what you need is kind of like when you're a musician and you have a monitor, you don't always just turn up more and more and more. Sometimes you reduce some of the noise that's in there to hear better certain instruments. And so sometimes you just need to turn down the noise, but focus on the exact same things.
Yeah.
And so there's that aspect where it's sometimes we can focus so much on, what am I going to do that's new and exciting? It's maybe you just need to reread the Christmas story, but with less other baggage around in your mind and heart to actually receive it again.
That's such a good point.
And similarly, sometimes people, I had someone ask me recently, someone who's dating and I'm sure, is looking forward to engagement soon. She was asking do you and Alicia get giddy when you see each other? And I'm like, what? She's like, the initial kind of just butterflies. And I'm just like, no, but I don't think that's bad. And I explained to this person, I was like, early on, even initial marriage, I think there was still times that was getting exciting and special in that way. And I'm like, now, because we married for a while and because being around each other and experiencing life together is so much more normal, before you noticed the specialness of being together. Now I notice the sadness when we're not together.
Being apart, yeah.
And so now the standard is no longer being giddy. It's being just together.
Yep.
And when we're not together, it's sad. And I think the same thing happens with stuff like holidays. Like, yes, there's nothing wrong with adding new things, but you also have to make sure that you're recognizing, appreciating that you have these things that have become common, because it's like, that is a blessing that is common.
Yeah.
There is a blessing to be found in not experiencing giddiness anymore, but experiencing this is normal. Like, what a blessing it is to be walking with God this long, that I know the story so well.
Yeah.
And to simply reflect on the story and reflect on the truths without it needing a giddiness.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing that you brought up there is it's the relationship aspect of it all, right? Because it's so many times that we put Jesus in like this abstract concept, and the fact that he's not a person, right? So it's because,
but he's a person of interest,
not just a person, but a person of interest. But no, because I like when you look at Ephesians and you look at all those outlines, it's like all those different relationships,
all these identities that you have in Christ,
right? And and then Paul like goes into it and he's like, well, this is because these are all allusions to your relationship with Jesus too. And it just kind of played out exactly how I was, because I in preparation for this I was like thinking about like,
hey, he prepped for this. No, I'm kidding.
A little bit.
I don't.
That's good.
I totally didn't.
It shows. No, I'm kidding.
Well,
you were saying.
So in preparation for this, I was thinking about, well, what sort of things, and I was thinking about the book of Ephesians and about how my relationship with my wife, and just trying to think about, I didn't realize I was actually going to bring it up and talk about it, but just kind of like how I've tried to talk about how I've tried to keep that fresh, because
Ziploc fresh.
Sorry,
Madagascar reference that no one gets anymore, but I still love it.
I absolutely get it. But anyway, I'm old. So, but with that is the whole relationship thing, because like, and I think that people kind of like lose that aspect of their walk with the Lord, is that it is about not just, I mean, you don't get to hold his hand or hug him yet, but someday you will. And right now it's like you get to deal with his spirit. So
I love that you brought this example up, because it's so it is all about relationships, right? Like,
you've been married about as long as he's been a Christian.
Exactly. And I was just gonna say like for Molly and I, like do you get giddy? Like no, like occasionally.
Ouch.
Like
this is too early not to get giddy, Arthur.
Like I'll say like if we're going on a date or something, and like we just, I'm working or whatever, and I meet her there, and
you're just
she's
like
all
extra
dressed
fresh
up, and and it's like, oh, like I do kind of feel a little bit giddy, but then it's like, but what you're saying is like, what I love about this is, we just experienced, like Molly was left for vacation just with her and her sister over this past weekend, and it's like I'm usually when we're like apart, usually it's because I'm going somewhere. And this time it was like, no, I was home. I was at home, and she
being
was
invited to a bunch of different things and not coming to any of them.
And she was going, and usually when I go, I feel homesick. It's like, you kind of like, you miss your bed. I miss Molly, whatever, and
whatever.
But when she left, I felt homesick, and I was like,
but I'm
thinking
home.
to myself, I'm like, I'm home. I'm in my own bed. Why do I feel homesick?
Home is where the heart is, Arthur.
And it's so true, because I realized, it was like, wow, like
your heart
went
to
Colorado. Our relationship
has
shifted in such a way that like now, like when I feel homesick, it's because Molly, like I'm without Molly, like I'm without my wife. Like it really does feel like two separate, like half of me is away, and it's not a good feeling. And but when she comes back, it's like I was like, wow, like there was a little bit of that giddiness, but it was more of like a relief. And I think
You're just stressed the whole time she's gone.
Kind of, like just internally, just weird. Anyways, maybe I'm just a weird guy, but
yes, but I don't think in that way.
I noticed it was like that giddiness, and just in any relationship, and I'm gonna bring this into I'm gonna talk about kids too, and being a kid to your father, like those feelings can change. and they can change, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Like the giddiness for you, maybe the giddiness for me, for sure, has morphed into, now when I see Molly, it's like a relief. Like when she came and visited at work yesterday, it was like nice. It's not giddy, but it's like I feel good. It's like a good feeling. Yeah. And so it's just changed, and that doesn't mean it's any worse or any better. I think you can say it's better in some aspect, but it's different. And so when you look at, like, when you're talking about Christ, our relationship with Christ, and you'll see this too, because, you know, you're a new believer, like, as, you know, even Jesus talks a lot about how kids, you know, how you're be youthful in your faith and be childish in your faith, but
childlike, not childish.
Childlike in your faith.
Murder you right now.
I'm so sorry, Tad. But then it's like we wean off of certain things, and we grow in our relationship with our Father. Like, I think that relationship, if you look back at your own life with you and your parents, like, you felt a certain way. Like when I went to kindergarten, I cried all the time because I missed my mom.
Yeah.
Then when I went to college, I cried again because I missed my mom. But those relationships change, right? And but it's not like they get worse. It's just the feelings change.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's such a cool way to look at it. And it's so, like, when we're talking about reigniting the holidays, it's not because we want to feel good about the holidays.
Yeah, it's not about to get an emotion out of it.
Exactly. Right. It's how do we seek Christ and partner with him on this relationship that we have with him, and how do we reignite that in this particular season?
Yeah, is to realign our hearts and to refocus our eyes on something that easily grows fuzzy and misaligned because of just time. I just finished reading this marriage book by Paul Tripp, and one of the things he talks about is that everything in life that requires maintenance has to be maintained ongoingly and intentionally, otherwise it falls apart.
Yep.
And he's examples of houses and vehicles and everything else, and our hearts are exactly the same. If you do not guard your heart, if you do not do the necessary weeding, if you do not do the necessary realigning, if you do not continue walking with God, and that's again why, you know, it's been said many times of like how Jesus says, pray for your daily bread, and, you know, all those kind of things. Like, the reason God does not give us, you know, our entire life plan is not because he doesn't think we could, you know, necessarily follow instructions, but it's because, well, then we would just take the instructions and leave God. We would just, you know, take a week's worth of bread and say, well, I'll see you next week then, God, instead of tomorrow. Yeah. And the same thing is with all this, is that, you know, our hearts require maintenance and re-guidance. And so it's not about trying to get a specific experience and emotion. It's just about the fact that when you experience a regular thing like a holiday, you naturally grow unfocused, you naturally grow misaligned. And it's just about how do you continue to maintenance that?
Yep. So, okay, a little bit of kind of going a different direction here. For you, Gabriel, I'm curious how, you know, you're kind of walking through this relationship with the holidays, or with Christ in this aspect around the holidays, kind of shifting and changing. What are some traditions that you're looking at or doing in a way that, like, helps you kind of bring you back into that place?
I really haven't looked at traditions, honestly.
Okay, then what's your thing then? How do you celebrate the holidays?
Yeah.
Well,
because you have traditions.
We do.
I know Thanksgiving, you guys often invite lots of other people to your home. This year that didn't work out. And so I know you have certain things that you anticipate and expect, and is like, this is what makes Christmas, that that align your focus on Christ. Which things continue to work, which things don't, which things need to be changed to reignite your passion for Jesus.
Yeah, well,
weren't prepared for this one, were you?
No, I wasn't. No, I was not at all. So traditions-wise, I haven't really looked at them, honestly. So I've been more focusing in on the relationship aspect with Jesus and how that's going to, because I think that, just like your relationship with your wife, you can kind of like neglect certain aspects of paying attention to that person because you just got so used and complacent. And for me, it's more of trying to work on that part of my relationship with Christ instead of like more of the tradition things, because it was the traditions and the lack of care that let me know that there was not something there that I was paying attention to that I needed to.
And I think it's important to note, just as a quick aside, that traditions are kind of like having a pre-planned date night schedule. Like without it, you can still foster a really healthy relationship. With it, you can still not foster a healthy relationship.
Yep.
But with it, if you utilized well, you can have a regular time that helps foster a relationship. And so traditions can be used well. They can also be used poorly, and you can do just fine without them.
Yeah.
Just to, make sure it's clear.
And so for you, what I hear you saying is like you're kind of taking a step back at this point. You're kind of dialing it down so that you can quiet the noise,
right,
sort of speak. So for this specific
taking stuff
season,
away to focus in on the reasons, and then coming back to it is what my plan was kind of.
Honestly, I think majority, although I gave multiple options when I taught on it, I think majority of Americans probably need to do that one first.
Yeah.
Because we do overbook our schedules, we do overbook our hearts and our lives. I think that is generally a decent first step, because you can't add anything without taking away something else. And usually people try to take away sleep, and that doesn't work very long.
Yep. Convicted over here. So to kind of close things out, as we're kind of ending the podcast, this episode, what are some things that you would have maybe that other people who are like you, who are, kind of recently got saved, had this explosion of just like, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah, maybe just a massive reigniting.
And then kind of they're seeing it kind of dissipate, but doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. What would you have to say to them? What's your encouragement?
My encouragement is just really just focusing on Jesus, because it's, for me, my walk, and this is just my personal walk, it's been kind of, it came later in life. So for me, I kind of looked at it. So I look at all the things that happened up until this point as building blocks, because I don't think that the Lord's going to use anything prior to that as waste. So I look at all the things that I did prior to, and I'm kind of like, well, what did the Lord do to prepare me for this in this season of life? So God is sovereign, and that's one thing that people can always look at, because I look at all those back things that happened and what they are doing to my heart now with the realization of what Christ did for us. So
that's cool. That's a unique perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Travis? I haven't really asked you. Maybe we did, but I'm still curious. Where are you at in this whole reigniting the holidays in your heart?
I think having children by default helps. Well, it helps and hurts the process, because it makes your schedule naturally busier, but because you are constantly trying to raise and train and experience life with your kid, you naturally are getting new experiences. You're naturally repeating things in new lights. You're naturally watching them experience things for the first time.
Yep.
So in some ways you get constant realignment because of kind of re-experiencing it through your kids, but you also get a little too much extra busyness to where it can throw off the alignment. And so as long as, I think especially for parents, focusing on the subtraction side probably helps the most, just because you're already getting some of the other stuff by default. And so you kind of have to intentionally shore up where it's weak in that season of life. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And so, Alicia and I, this year in particular, had to cut back on a lot of things we normally do, just out of necessity of certain responsibilities that came up that, took more time. And so this year in particular, it's definitely in the subtraction aspect, where we are trying to not overbook ourselves, because that happens so naturally and easily in this season of life, and trying to really leverage the uniqueness that comes with raising children, of seeing their perspective. Annie's at the age this year, being 3, that there's more real conversations happening with her, and obviously how much she's digesting, but
she's a little bit sentient now.
And so there's actual conversations happening, obviously more so with the boys, and that's just only going to continue to grow, but it's increased the amount of conversations we're having, because now we're having with 2 older boys who are very much aware and able to talk through things, and now a second conversation with at a lower shelf level with a 3-year-old. And so naturally that happens as a parent, where you can kind of enjoy the refocusing because you're constantly trying to help someone else refocus. We've already had many conversations with the boys about presents and about what's, why do we even give presents? And, are we disappointment or excitement about certain presents and stuff like that. So you naturally are having those conversations. Yeah. So if you take just a little bit of time to reflect, it's already naturally realigning. You just have to focus more on subtraction.
It kind of reminds me, whether this was a good thing or a bad thing in my public school that I went to, if you were disruptive or like got in trouble, they did this thing called like refocus, where you'd have to like walk to this, like you walk to another classroom and then you fill out these like refocus sheets. And like the bad part of it was like all the other kids in the classroom like know you got in trouble because you're walking into their classroom and filling this thing out. But the good thing about it was that there wasn't like if you got a certain amount, you'd go to the principal, whatever. But as you filled this out, it was like all you did, it was literally, you just said, you wrote your name and then what you did that was disruptive, and then you'd walk back. And you go back in the classroom. And what it did, and they call it refocus, is because it actually just like, it stopped the behavior or whatever.
Stopped the moment.
Yeah, stopped the moment.
Yeah, it stopped the downhill trajectory that you were on.
Exactly. And then it
building
just,
momentum.
It like stopped you and you reflected, like you're saying you've reflected on it, and then you went back. And I think that's what I'm doing as well this year for me is it's this whole experience has kind of been my refocus.
Yeah.
Where now I'm like, I got to go and actually like refocus here. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing to do. And I think it's a good thing to do in many different aspects of our life.
Pause and see, is this really what I should be doing right now? Is this really what I want to do right now? Put a stopgap in the ongoing just pursuit of more and continuing and moving forward.
Passion is good, but it's also good to rest and reflect as well. So, Gabe, thanks so much for coming on again and telling us your story. And thanks for watching, listening, and joining with us during this episode and during this season of Reigniting the Holidays. We're going to have one more episode of this series, and it's actually going to be post Christmas for us, and if you watch and listen at the right time. So it'll be kind of a cool way to kind of reflect a little bit and look forward to the new year and look forward to different holidays happening. So thanks again for watching. And as always, if you do have questions, comments, whatever it is, put them down in the comments wherever you're watching this, YouTube, Spotify, wherever. And on our website, there's a place to go, calrioli.com/follow resources, follow podcast. And you can input questions there as well. So definitely do that. We'll try to answer them post-Christmas, our post-Christmas episode. Thanks again. And as always, God bless.